Lunch. So good afternoon. I'm Steve Barry, President and CEO of CCA. Welcome. We are so pleased to have you with us today. I hope you enjoyed this morning's events. We were able to start out quick, and hopefully you got to go to some of the seminars. I also would like to welcome those of you that are joining us live stream this morning with our host broadcast partner, RCR Wireless. Thank you, RCR. Appreciate it. It has already been a busy morning, as I suggested, and hopefully you've gotten a chance to not only get lunch, but also meet and greet a lot of new friends and old acquaintances. I'd like to thank Sprint for the lunch hosting today. Thank you, Sprint. Great job. It pleases me great to say that we have something extraordinary to go with your lunch. Two very impressive keynote speakers, both joining us from Washington, D.C. But before we hear from their speakers, just give me a moment to thank those who participated in yesterday's bass fishing tournament, annual golf tournament, and the laser skeet shooting tournament we had at the reception last night. Did everyone enjoy that? Was it a good event? Something maybe we should redo? Thank you. It was wonderful to see everyone engaging in all the activities and actually having an opportunity to network in a different context than we normally do. So thank you. None of these special networking operations would have been possible without our sponsoring companies. So it's great to see such a good crowd. And like I say, many old friends. And now, get our afternoon program underway. It gives me great pleasure to have with us FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr. Now, he's a strong ally at the FCC, and in particular, has been critical in making our voices heard on the issue of infrastructure reform. Commissioner Carr provided his first remarks as Commissioner at CCA's 2017 Annual Convention. And since then, he's been a driving force to rural broadband issues, including focus on deploying telehealth services, including health services throughout the U.S., spurring job creation, NG 911 advancements, and as noted, critical work to streamlining infrastructure siting policies at the state and local levels and the national level. Commissioner Carr is one of the hardest working public servants in Washington, D.C., and he has been unwavering in his efforts to bring infrastructure reform to the 21st century. We look forward to hearing more on these and other efforts as our nation gets, in his quotes, 5G ready. We should all give a big thank you for his Herculean effort to pass the FCC's most recent infrastructure order this past Wednesday. A job well done. So if you don't mind, let's hear it for Commissioner Carr. Welcome back to CCA, Commissioner Brendan Carr. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it.
Great.
Thanks. Well, thank you, Steve, for that kind introduction. I think you all know this, obviously, but Steve and his whole team in D.C., from Courtney to Tim, to the attorney formerly known as the general counsel, Rebecca, who's no longer with the team, has really done outstanding work representing your interests in D.C. and getting a number of significant legislative and regulatory wins, particularly the last year or so. So hats off to Steve and his leadership and his team. They're doing great work. And thank you to CCA's members for the work that you do every day to connect your communities in rural America to next generation broadband. You bring high-speed wireless service and the economic opportunity that comes with it to some of the hardest to serve parts of the country. So thank you for your work, thank you for your investment. As Steve mentioned, it is great for me to be back with all of you at CCA. As he mentioned, I gave my first speech as an FCC Commissioner 1 year ago at your annual convention. In it, I announced that Chairman Pai had asked me to lead the FCC's efforts to modernize our approach to wireless infrastructure, which is particularly critical given the need to densify networks ahead of this push to 5G. It's been a busy time at the Commission since then, and I'm very proud of the progress that the agency has made. We started out by moving forward with a number of long pending items at the Commission. Right after CCA's show last year, we adopted what's known as a pole swap-out order. It eliminated the need for those costly historic preservation reviews when a provider looks to replace a utility pole for the purpose of adding new antennas. The next month, we set out a definitive solution for the so-called Twilight Towers issue. Those are towers, as I'm sure you know, that were built between 2001 and 2005 that did not necessarily undergo a specific historic review process. That decision can help open up potentially thousands of existing towers for the deployment of new wireless infrastructure. But in all of this, as we worked our way through the proceeding, it became clear that regulatory incrementalism was not going to cut it. With the transition from 4G to 5G underway, the FCC needed to take bold action. And here's why. Winning the global race to 5G, seeing this new platform deployed in the US first, is about economic leadership for the next decade. Those are the stakes. And here's how we know it. Think back a decade ago when we were on the cusp of the last major upgrade in wireless from 3G to 4G. Think about the largest companies in the country at the time. They were big banks and big oil. Today, the 4 largest companies in the world are Apple, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. They're all tech, they're all American, and they're all riding on the mobile broadband networks that you built. Think about your own life. A decade ago, catching a ride across town involved calling a phone number, waiting 20 minutes for a cab to arrive, and paying rates that were inaccessible to many people. Today, we have Lyft, Uber, Via, and other options. A decade ago, sending money meant going to a brick-and-mortar bank, standing in one of those rope lines, getting frustrated when that pen leashed to the table was out of ink again, and ultimately conducting your transaction with a teller. Now with Square, Venmo, and other apps, you can send money or deposit checks from anywhere 24 hours a day. A decade ago, meeting your future husband or wife required, I know this is going to sound very 1950s to the millennials here, so stay with me, mustering the courage to walk up to someone in person and wait for it, engage in an actual conversation in which you ask him or her out. Today, my staff tell me a potential loved one can be just a swipe away. Now, in going over that paragraph with my staff, I learned something new a couple weeks ago about dating. So when I met my wife back in law school, dating meant you would have to do at least 3 things on a date. You could maybe have drinks at one place, maybe go to dinner someplace else, some sort of activity, maybe walking around the monuments in DC. My staff tell me that now a date is simply going out for drinks. And I think this is unacceptable. I think we need to update and reform the approach to dating, or in today's rubric, we need to make dating great again. But I leave that for another agency. I think it might be NTIA to figure out how to get that one across the finish line. So back to the script. American companies led the way in developing these 4G innovations, such as they are. But it's not by chance or luck that the U.S. is the world's tech and innovation hub. We have the strongest wireless economy in the world because we won the race to 4G. No country had faster 4G deployment or more intense investment than we did. Winning the race to 4G added $100 billion to our GDP. It led to $125 billion in revenue for U.S. companies that could have gone abroad. It grew wireless jobs in the U.S. by 84%. And our world-leading 4G networks now supports today's $950 billion a year app economy. You know this, because you built this. CCA members, as we talked about, serve some of the toughest to reach communities in the country. You work field by field, gravel road by gravel road, providing coverage to your neighbors. You can probably find easier and I'm sure much less stressful lines of work. So I want to acknowledge again the work that you do each day to connect Americans with next generation opportunity. In my view, those of us in government should be working to make your jobs easier, not harder. I hope that we've made progress recently in doing that. After all, our communities have gained so much because you made sure America was first to 4G. Winning the race to 5G matters in the same way. It determines whether capital will flow here, whether innovators will start their new businesses here, and whether the economy that benefits is the one here. Whereas Deloitte put it, first adopter countries could sustain more than a decade of competitive advantage. And we're not the only country that wants to be first to 5G. One of our biggest competitors is China. They view 5G as a chance to flip the script. They want to lead the tech sector for the next decade. And they're moving aggressively to deploy the infrastructure needed for 5G. Since 2015, China has deployed 350,000 cell sites. We've built fewer than 30,000. Right now, China is deploying 460 cell sites a day. That's 12 times our pace. All told, China has 1.9 million cell sites. We have around 200,000. So we have to be honest about this infrastructure challenge, and we need to show the courage to act. Our plan at the FCC is straightforward. We're getting the government out of the way so that you, the leaders in the private sector, can invest and compete. We're executing on this plan. In March, I led an order that exempted small cells, the physical building blocks of 5G, from certain federal historic and environmental reviews. Thank you. I had at least one shout out for that. That was nice. Thank you. That order was based on the common sense conclusion that small cells have a much more modest impact than 200-foot towers, and so they should be treated differently. That one decision cut nearly $1.6 billion of red tape, and one wireless provider reports that it's now clearing small cells for construction at 6 times the pace as before. So we're closing the gap, but there's more work to do. Just last week, the Commission approved an order aimed at reducing unnecessary costs and delays in the local approval process. That decision is estimated to cut another $2 billion in red tape, stimulate $2.4 billion in infrastructure investment, and I think this is probably the most important figure, provide 2 million more families with next-gen service, 97% of which is in rural and suburban communities. In the lead up to last week's order, we heard from a number of community leaders, especially in rural America. I want to read to you just one of the letters I received. This is from a board of commissioners from a more rural county in Michigan. They wrote, "Smaller communities, such as those located in St. Clair County, would benefit by having the FCC reduce the costly and unnecessary fees that some larger communities place on small cells as a condition of deployment. These fees, wholly disproportionate to any cost, put communities like ours at an unfair disadvantage. By making small cell deployment less expensive, the FCC will send a clear message that all communities, regardless of size, should share in the benefits of this crucial new technology." They're right. When I think about success, when I think about winning this race to 5G, the finish line is not the moment that we see next-gen deployments in New York or San Francisco. Success can only be achieved when all Americans, no matter where they live, have a fair shot at fast, affordable broadband. Through last week's order, we adopted the ideas championed by local leaders, and especially the ideas embodied in the 20 state small cell bills that legislatures enacted over the last 2 years. The order contains 4 main ideas borrowed from those state bills. First, it reaffirms local control over wireless infrastructure decisions where it's most appropriate, while setting a reasonable baseline so that we can promote nationwide 5G deployment. Again, we need to ramp up to something in the order of 60,000 new cell sites deployed each year and increasing over the next few years. By taking a balanced approach, we show respect for the work of state legislatures and don't disturb nearly any of the provisions in the 20 state-level small cell bills. Second, it affirms that local governments may charge wireless providers for the costs associated with reviewing small cell deployments. There will be no subsidizing of broadband deployment by local governments. Providers should bear those costs. At the same time, we know that excessive fees slow down next-gen deployments and consume the scarce capital needed to bring broadband to rural and less affluent communities. So we require in the decision that fees amount to a reasonable approximation of local government's costs. Third, it tailors the shot clocks that have long governed local review of infrastructure deployments for the size and scale of small cells. Consistent with many state laws, we determine that local governments should conclude their approval processes within 60 days for small cells being added to existing structures and 90 days when a provider wants to put up a new small cell pole. We also build in a mechanism to recognize when a large number of small cell applications could lead to legitimate overload in the local permitting process. Fourth, it preserves local government's reasonable aesthetic reviews. We affirm that federal law does not prevent local governments from continuing to apply aesthetic standards so long as they're objective and reasonable and non-discriminatory, and that they're made public in advance. These are common sense ideas that come from local leaders. By taking their ideas nationwide, we can ensure that every community has a fair shot at next generation broadband. Indeed, by lowering the cost of deploying small cells, this decision will flip the business case for building 5G in rural and less affluent communities. In all of this, I want to assure you that the FCC is committed, not just in our words, but in our action, to winning the race to 5G for the benefit of all communities. So thank you again to Steve for your outstanding work.
and the work of your talented staff in making wireless infrastructure reform a reality this year. Thank you to CCA's members for providing the data and the real-world examples of the challenges you face when building mobile broadband. We learned from your experience, and your input made the difference in getting this win for American consumers across the finish line. I'm confident that with these reforms in place, with your commitment to building next-gen networks and communities across the country, the U.S. is back on track in the race to 5G. Thank you again for all your work and for letting me join you again this year at your conference. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Carr. Thank you so very much. It is so nice to have you with us.